Thanks everyone for coming back for round two. Today I wanted to try and give a bit more definition into what supply chain and logistics is, and to chuck out some definitions around regular terms that we sort of say and use and will start becoming more common here. So firstly, supply chain and logistics often gets a bit confused, even with people in the industry. So to try to break it down a bit simply, and I'll chuck up a little image on the right here if I can get that to work. But supply chain essentially covers the whole end-to-end process from sourcing what raw materials are needed to make a product, the manufacturing of the product, and then the delivery of it to the end customers. Now, that's a very simple approach. There's a lot of things that go into that, but essentially supply chain strategy might help to define where are the raw ingredients and materials coming from, where are we making our products, what locations are we selling to, and then how our customers buy from us. So sort of online, if it's brick and mortar, if it's retail. So that's kind of the holistic view of what supply chain might be. And then within that, logistics is the movement, orchestration of storage and goods within the supply chain. So that's when we look at trucks, ships, planes, trains, warehouses, networks, all of that comes into the logistics space that goes through there. The way I kind of been thinking about the last couple of days, if you think supply chain is a restaurant, then logistics is the chef who runs that restaurant. That's kind of how those two things come together. So to talk through that as a bit of an example or case study, and I'll stick on the brewery talk at the moment because that's sort of something that I like to talk about and I know a little bit about. If you look at the supply chain of an independent craft brewer, the first thing they sort of need to decide is what product are they making and what ingredients they need to make that product. So if they're going to make just a standard lager, they're going to need water, they're going to need hops, they're going to need malt, and they're going to need yeast. And they need to know where those four things are going to come from. Things like water is generally available, as you can imagine. But the other three, they need to have a sourcing strategy and planning on where that can come from. They'll likely have a brewery somewhere, so they need to set up a brewery somewhere, and then they'll be able to plan out how much capacity they can make in that brewery. But once they've made the beer in the brewery, they need to work out, well, are we going to have a little brew bar that we're going to have out the front? Are we going to sell our products in Tesco, Sainsbury, Coles or Woolies for those at home? Are we going to sell them in kegs to pubs? Are we going to sell them to bottle shops and off licenses in cans and bottles? Or are we going to do online and sell products online? So all of these questions are sort of stuff that they'd be looking at to determine what their supply chain strategy would be. And once they've answered all that questions, they have to work out, well, if I've got a brewery up here in Edinburgh and I'm selling into London, how will I sell my product there? Do I whack it all on a truck and send it down once a week? Do I set up a warehouse somewhere and put it in a warehouse so I can replenish that warehouse out of the brewery and down there? So all of these things are sort of key parts that the brewery needs to consider to determine what their supply chain strategy would firstly be, but then their logistics strategy to make sure they're meeting the demands of their customers. So if you think that there's a lot to this, then there is. You can have varying levels of complexity in your supply chain, and generally what happens is as you grow and get bigger, more complexity gets taken over. No longer can you just chuck things on a truck and run it down and deliver it yourself. You need to start outsourcing and getting people to help you. Or you can keep it in-sourced at huge expense for CapEx and investment, but we'll park that for now. So what generally tends to happen is people will then partner with a logistics provider. And throughout this, you'll hear me say probably 3PL, 4PL, 5PL, I'd say a lot. But as you can see, if I chuck up in this little graphic, if I've chucked up here, this is sort of what that means. A 1PL is just essentially you do everything yourself. Small business, small operation, easy to manage. As you grow, you might start going, well, I need someone to come drive some trucks for me and do deliveries. So you go like that. Then we start stepping into a third party where you're like, well, I now need to have warehouses all over the country. I need someone to manage those warehouses and they can manage that distribution. But as we grow and get more sophisticated and more complicated, we start bringing in things like 4PL providers who do the whole orchestration and how everything interacts and uses their scale and consolidation to drive costs down and drive efficiencies. And the favorite one that's coming through now is a thing that we're starting to call 5PL, fifth party logistics, which involves data and technology on top of that. So we'll cover more of this as I get more into detail, but hopefully that gives you a bit of an initial overview of what supply chain logistics 3PLs, 4PLs, 5PLs are. Any questions, chuck them in the comments and we can keep chatting.